All right, so we're back in the kitchen, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start getting the things going that are going to take the longest amount of time. So we're going to be making a brown rice, and we're also going to be making roasting things in the oven. So the first two things I'm going to need to do is I need to get the rice going, and I need to get the oven preheated. Preheating the oven to 350. And here's a little tip as well, is brown rice typically takes over an hour to do, but not when you're using a pressure cooker. So if you have an Instant Pot or a different pressure cooker, this is going to be one of a really important pieces of kitchen equipment that will help speed up a lot of your stuff in the kitchen. One thing you want to do when you're making rice as well is you want to make sure, one thing you want to do when you're making rice as well is you want to make sure that you're rinsing your rice. There's a bunch of different debris and dead kernels that come up when rinsing rice, and we're making it for 2 people. So I'm going to go ahead and soak this in cold water for about a couple minutes. All right, so I got the rice soaking there. Start pulling some of the starch out of there. And while that's doing that, I'm going to start to prep everything else. One tip for people who struggle with protein, cooking protein, is marinate. So you can get a really good marinate in probably under 10 minutes. 5 is probably the bare minimum you want, but we're going to be marinating our chicken for probably about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to start to get that marinade going while I get all these other ingredients out of here. Okay, so for the marinade, what we're going to be making, so you saw when I was shopping, I got 2 different types of chicken. I got chicken, 2 cuts of chicken. So I got chicken breasts and chicken thighs. So chicken thighs are a little fattier. They're a little easier to work with. Chicken breasts are a little bit, they're harder to cook well because a lot of people overcook them and they're super dry. So a little pro tip is to mix them together. So you're going to get a little bit of that moist flavor and rich flavor from the fat from the chicken thighs, and you're going to get that lean protein from the chicken breast. So you're going to have kind of best of both worlds. Okay, so for our marinade, what we're going to do is we got an empty bowl here. We're going to put together, it's a little bit of an Asian recipe, so I'm going to do a little bit of rice vinegar. I'll put the measurements to these in the comments below because I've been doing this for forever, so I rarely ever measure. I have a good sense of how much I'm doing. So I'm doing about a teaspoon of rice vinegar, about 2 to 3 tablespoons of 25% tamari, 25% less sodium tamari. Then I'm going to put about 1 tablespoon of mirin, which is a rice cooking wine. So one thing we're going to add in there as well is a Worcestershire sauce. And what this is going to do is this is going to add a bold kind of earthy flavor, a lot of that umami, like a richness, a depth that a lot of like soy sauce is going to do too, but it's also going to have more of that kind of smoky flavors to it. Then we're going to add about a tablespoon of minced garlic. So this is a quick way to get minced garlic so you don't have to make it yourself. You can always mince garlic yourself if you're wanting to do that as well, which I've gone over a lot of ways to mince garlic with a press or by using a knife, but this allows you to expedite the process. And then ginger. So for the ginger, what I'm going to do, we're going to do about a thumb's worth of ginger. And the easiest way to peel ginger, if people do not know this trick, is actually to use a spoon. So I'm going to use the side of the spoon and I'm going to come across the ginger right there, and you're going to see that it's just pulling that skin right off. It makes a really easy way to peel ginger. You can get into those little nooks and crannies really easily as well that you would have to just demolish if you're using a peeler. So it doesn't have to be perfect because we're just using this for the marinade. So now I'm just going to mince this up, throw this in our marinade. One thing that every good chef needs, or any home cook needs, is a good knife. If you don't have a good knife, I recommend investing in it. You can get a fairly decent one for around $60. But if you're having a hard time struggling with chopping a bunch of things in the kitchen, oftentimes it's going to be the quality and the sharpness of your knife. And if you're maintaining the sharpness edge of your knife, we'll do a whole other video on that. But if you're maintaining the sharpness of the blade, you're going to have a better time cooking in the kitchen. I guarantee it. All right, so you see it's just roughly chopped, this ginger. I'm just going to be putting it in there because we don't need it to be too super fine, because we're just doing it for the marinade, just to get that flavor in our chicken. So what I'm going to do now with our chicken, I'm just going to open up these guys, and we're going to be cooking these whole to maintain a lot of the flavor, and as well as the natural, to keep the meat nice and juicy. We don't want it to be overly dry. And the way that you can do that is by how we're going to cook it, is by searing the outside and then finishing it off in the oven. So I'm leaving these completely whole. If you're wanting to cook this up a lot faster for, like, say, dinner, cut them down. That way it's going to cook up a lot quicker and you can get dinner on the table a lot faster. But since we're doing this for meal prep, it's going to take about the same amount of time anyway. So we are just getting them together and putting them whole into our marinade. So we got our chicken in our marinade. So now we're just going to mix that around. Make sure that we're getting even coverage here on all the different bits of the chicken. And we'll be mixing this up periodically to make sure that pieces that are on the top are getting closer to the bottom, etc., as we let that sit. So now we're going to let that marinade for about probably 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so we got the marinade going. So now that we have our chicken marinating, we're going to shift back over to the rice. So now we have been allowing this rice to soak, and you can see a lot of that starch is starting to pull up to the top of the water. So now I would normally do this about 2 or 3 times, but just for the sake of the video, I'm going to go ahead and just strain this right now. So I got this strained. So now I'm going to put this into our Instant Pot. Now, a question I get about rice all the time is, how do I know the right amount of water to use? And the short answer is there's this little trick where you're going to measure the top of the water to the top of the rice. So here's the top of the rice. As I stick my index finger into the top of the water, I want that water level to come up around to the top of my first knuckle. And that doesn't matter the size of the pot that you're cooking it in, the volume is always going to be the same based off of that measurement. A beep in the background means that our oven's preheated, which is perfect because we want to have that ready to fire once we get everything else going. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this with water. I'm going to do the finger test up to the first knuckle, and then I'm going to set that to a rice setting on the Instant Pot. One thing I absolutely love about the rice water measuring trick is that you don't ever have to make a cup of rice. You don't ever have to make a cup and a half of rice. You can make as much rice as you want. And it will allow you to have the most random volume of rice because it's going to be equivalent to the amount of water that you're putting into it. All right, got that going. So now, grabbing our lid, which is, where the hell did I put the lid? Everyone in the video is going to be like, it's right there. Oh, it's still up here. Okay, so I got our lid. All right, so I'm going to get that lid on there. And so I'm just going to go ahead and set this to the right setting to prove what it does. It's only about 8 minutes. It's going to set it, and that's going to start going. So now that that's going, we're going to start chopping up our vegetables. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys a quick trick on how to chop up a pepper. You have a couple different options here. So one thing that people struggle with peppers is, how do I keep the seeds together or not in the rest of my meal, right? So there's a couple different ways you can do this. One, you can press down on the top here and continue to press until this pops off, and you'll be able to pop that off. I have another video that I'll share that goes over that technique. Another technique, which is the one I'm going to do today, is you can look at how this is constructed, and you can carve around, cutting the majority of the meat, if you will, of the pepper and leaving all the seeds intact. So we're going to do that method. We're going to go ahead and lop this little knob of the top off, so that way it will sit flush on the counter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve from the base out and around, and you can see that all of those seeds are staying intact. And as I continue to do that, I'll be able to see that all of these seeds and the little pith from the whites of the pepper are all holding that in place. Isn't that neat? And then I can cut off that little bottom section there. So all of that, which I'm not going to usually use when I'm cooking. And then we have our perfect sliced pepper. So now for our meal today, these are going to be served raw, because it's going to maintain a lot more of the nutritional value of it, as well as add crunch and freshness to our meals. So one thing I'm going to do with peppers is, you never want to cut from this side. You want to cut from the inside. And the reason why is it's a lot easier to slice and will make your life a lot easier when you're slicing these up. So what I'm doing, the technique that I'm doing, is I'm pushing down with the tip of the blade and I'm pulling back and dragging it, allowing me to cut them. They refer to as julienne, which is these long strips. And I'm just going to go through with all of these and slice these out. And we will have our bell pepper for our meal. Okay. Next, onions. I love chopping onions. I can do it very, very quickly, and I'm going to show you how to do it very, very quickly. So I'm going to take this outer shell off, and I'm going to cut the top off, and then I'm going to cut the base of the bulb off as well. And then now I have this guy. So now I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to take the outer peel, and sometimes I'll take the first layer off as well, depending on how the onion is constructed, because sometimes that outer layer is a little rough around the edges. So I have that cut in half. Now here's the trick. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the blade, and I'm going to draw back using that same drawback method we were using with peppers, but instead of going all the way through the onion, I'm only going to go about 90% of the way through, leaving about 10% on the edge, so that way it's still held together. Then I'm going to create my little claw shape using the front of my back of my knuckle as the guide for when I am chopping, and I'm going to cinch in with my thumb and my pinky, and I'm just going to use that as the guide as I'm coming back chopping this onion. And if you do this successfully, you'll never cut yourself. And then we have our chopped onions. Now we're going to get that into a bowl as we're prepping all of our vegetables here. And we're going to get a pan on with a little bit of olive oil, and we're going to start sauteing these onions down to get them nice and caramelized. All right, so we got our pan. I like to use ceramic. They're naturally nonstick, they're non-toxic, they don't have PFOAs or PTFEs, I think, are the two nonstick chemicals out there that have a lot of negative toxic properties to them. And I don't like cooking with toxic cookware, personally. So have a ceramic pan. I'm gonna get a little bit of olive oil in there. You can either use spray or actually I'm going to be using avocado oil because I have a little bit left of this guy. And I'm going to put probably about 1.5 tablespoons in there. You can use a little bit less. It depends on how much fat you're cooking with. I'm going to go ahead and put that on a medium heat. So one thing that a lot of people do is they cook with temperatures that are way too hot, right? So the trick with that is to heat the oil and heat the pan so that way you're basically curing the pan while you're starting to cook. So if you put it in there and you put all your vegetables in there when it's either too cold, or if you crank it to high heat, that's when you're going to start to see things either not cook all the way through, get too mushy, or just char and burn. So there's different techniques when you would want those types of things to happen. But in this instance, we're going to wait for that oil to heat up probably a couple minutes, and that's going to give us what we're looking for as far as the temperature of the pan. So during these moments where you're waiting for things to heat up, waiting for things to come up to condition, or waiting for things to marinate, these are the times when you're going to be wanting to do the type of tasks that normally are going to take you more time. So you can start cleaning to keep your kitchen clean as you're cooking, which is always a really good idea. Or you can start prepping other things while you're moving through this. So I'm waiting for that to go through and heat up. I'm going to go ahead and start to prep our zucchini. Now these are really easy to cut and dice and slice depending on how you want to cook them. With zucchini, I like to have slivers, right? Just the circular little medallions. So I'm going to cut off the tip at the end here. And this is just your traditional chopping, right? I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to push down, and I'm going to pick it up, and I'm going to push down again. And so you're going to be able to do it really quickly. And another tip to do for zucchini, if you have the option, is to use a mandolin. And so that's going to allow you to press those guys through or chop them in a single motion, and you'll get the same level of consistency in thickness that you want because you'll have a level of control to set that on there. I feel like mandolins take a lot of setup and they're a pain to clean. And so I only ever really use them when I'm trying to cook for that level of specificity and if I'm trying to worry about the presentation of what I'm working on, which is fairly often. But for weekly meal prep, that's not something I'm necessarily going to do. So got these guys chopped. I'm going to move them over to a bowl. All right, so now it's time to work on our chicken. So that guy's been marinating for probably about 10-15 minutes. And I have this pan preheating over here. And you'll be able to see the oil jump around. And this, I want a little bit hotter than where it's currently at. You'll see when you first put oil in the pan, it will be really thick and viscous. And it'll start to get thinner and move around a lot quicker once it starts to get up to temperature. And you'll start to see where the heating sections of your stove are because it will start to expand away from those sections as you're getting it up to temperature. So I have that set to about a medium-high heat because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this chicken and I'm going to sear it on both sides. So I want to get that pretty piping hot. I don't want it to be on a crazy high heat because I don't want it to overcook too quickly. But I want to have it hot enough that I'm going to be able to get that char, that sear that I'm looking for. And how you get that is you want to make sure you have a little bit of sugar, like in your mix, or a little bit of starch or something that's going to allow that crispness to transpire with. So if you don't have any sugar in the marinade at all, and you're just trying to go just chicken with salt and pepper on the outside of it, then you're going to want to make sure that you've taken the chicken out of the fridge for a long enough time, or if you're coming home from the store, to make sure that it's getting up to about room temperature before you throw it in the pan. So you can see how that oil is now really dancing around that pan. So that is a perfect type of temperature. So now you can say, hey, is that hot enough? There's a couple different ways that you can test that. You can either use a small piece of onion, a little bit of water. Water is going to make it splash, so I like to use an onion. Or you can also use, a lot of people use the end of a wooden spoon, or use a wooden chopstick. And that's going to bubble up around the edges, and you'll know that your oil is ready to go. So you can hear that crisping sound, and you can see that it's starting to bubble around. That means that my oil is ready to fire. So I'm going to go ahead, drop these guys in there. One thing that people do too often is they crowd the pan. If you crowd the pan with a ton of meat, that's also going to keep it from getting that crispness or that char that you're looking for. You want that air to be able to move around in the pan. So I'm going to do this in a couple batches. So I'm going to cook each side of this chicken for about a minute and a half per side. I'm not trying to cook this all the way through, because remember, we're finishing this off in the oven, and I want to make sure that it's hot enough that we're starting to get that crispness and that browning that's happening on the outside of the chicken. What that's going to do is it's basically sealing in the moisture, so we're getting that induction heat when it's cooking in the oven, where the interior is continuing to cook and it's not letting it leave the surface. So you can start to see that we're getting that crispness. We're getting that it's like Christmas. We're starting to get that browning that's occurring on the outside of this chicken. So we're going to go ahead and flip those over, and we're going to give it another minute. And then we're going to do the next round. So it's going to probably take us around 3 to 5 minutes to cook all of our chicken, depending on how much we're cooking. While we're waiting for that other side to cook up, one thing that is really important to remember about timing in the kitchen is to try to be as efficient as possible. And what I mean by that is not to try to have 17 different pots and 17 different pans that are happening with all these things at different timing, when you can consolidate them all into one thing. So one thing that we are going to be doing is, when I'm taking this chicken off of here and setting the next round, we're going to be using that same pan. We're going to be doing this process called deglazing, where we're going to be cooking using our onion and a little bit of water to really get that richness and that flavor from the chicken, imbuing it in all the vegetables. And what we're going to also be doing after we've been cooking until those are a little bit aromatic is we're going to be cooking the chicken and all the vegetables together in one pan. All right, so now we're getting the second round of the chicken there. Our Instant Pot is up to pressure, and it has about 4 minutes left on the full pressure of the timing. And then we're going to do what is called a natural release. So this is something, if you've never used Instant Pots, or when you first start using Instant Pots, you're like, what the hell is a natural release? So a natural release is, once it is done cooking and the sensor has been shut off, the pressure is going to start to dissipate, but at a very slow amount. They have a button you can push, which is the fast or quick release, and that allows it to relieve all the pressure that's in here in about like 2 minutes. So a natural release, you'll see a lot of recipes that come with that. We're going to natural release this for about 10 to 15 minutes. So we're wanting to make sure, just like when you're normally cooking rice, we're allowing that steam to really do the work. And because it's at a high pressure and that energy doesn't have anywhere to go, it helps with breaking down the hard shell of the brown rice and expedites the cooking process of what we're actually putting together with that meal. Okay, remember, we're not trying to cook this chicken all the way through, so we're going to go ahead and pull this last batch out. And we have all this delicious goodness in the bottom of this pan. We definitely don't want to waste that. So what we're going to do is, now we're going to take our onion, and we're going to throw that onion into the mix. And we're going to grab a spatula, and we're going to mix it all up. And this is a process called deglazing the pan. We're basically taking this onion and we're mixing it up, getting all of those delicious flavor bits from browning the chicken. You never want to waste that. And we're cooking it into our vegetable. So now we're going to cook this for about 2 to 3 minutes just to get the aromatics going. Until you can start to smell it and it's really fragrant and you start to see the onions turn from that solid white or yellow into a little bit more translucent. And you can start to see a little bit of light coming through them. Sound is the sound of our Instant Pot being done. And so now it's going to start the keep warm or natural release process for about 10 to 15 minutes. One thing that's important to have around when you're cooking too is something to snack on. So these are the wasabi and soy sauce coated almonds. I love these. Nuts are excellent because they're really high in protein, good fats, stabilize your blood sugar, and cut that kind of hunger or hangry feeling that a lot of people have when they're cooking. And to have fun, turn on music, pop. What I'm currently obsessed with is hop water. I recently went sober in February, and I'm trying to find solutions for having a nice crisp beverage whenever I'm looking to have that type of sensation. And this is a sparkling hop water, which basically tastes like beer, but it has 0 calories, 0 sugar, and hits that spot, you know? And so for people who are trying to do something a little bit different but still want that same like refreshing beverage taste, I have a lot of options that we can talk about. Oh, so good. All right, so you see what I'm talking about those edges starting to get a little bit translucent. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push them off to the side. That was from yesterday. I'm going to push them off to the side. Okay? And you can see that's still browned a little bit in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of water. Not a lot, just a little bit. And we're going to get that flavor from that browning bit to clear off there. So now I'm going to move that to the side. And now I'm going to put our chicken back in there. And then I'm going to move and I'm going to toss all of that onion pretty much on top. So that way the chicken is the most thing that's on the bottom of the pan. And remember when I said about crowding the pan? In this instance, this is fine. And the reason why I say that is because this is going to be cooking in the oven that we've been preheating for quite some time now. And this marinade, a lot of people just discard it depending on when you use it, because obviously if you're not cooking it like we're cooking it right now, there's salmonella in all chicken. It just exists if you don't cook it. So you have to be very careful with how you use this, but this is a lot of flavor that would just be going to waste. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dump the rest of that on there. Topped with our zucchini. And we're going to go right into the oven. So if you do not have oven-safe cookware, you can transfer that entire thing onto a preheated baking sheet or into like a casserole dish or like a Pyrex pie dish. You want to make sure you're preheating it though, because otherwise it's going to go from hot to cold, and you don't want that. Okay, so now we're going to set a timer for about 15 minutes. There we go, timer set. Turn that off. So now at this point, you have about 15 minutes to chill or to do dishes or hang out with your family, do whatever you're doing. We're going to make a quick pickle for this cabbage to go on the side while we're waiting here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take off the outer leaves on this. You can already see that it's a much better color. And I'm going to cut half of it, or about a third. We're going to save this later for different recipes. But we're going to go ahead and rinse this off. And we're going to go ahead and dice this up into fine shreds. And so I'm going to go ahead and chop these into strips that are about probably a 1/4 of an inch wide. And then I'm going to go back across, crosshatch style. So that way we get this nice shredded cabbage. You can leave them in long strips, however you want. The beautiful thing about cooking is you get to make it however you want. So now I'm going to get a container that has an airtight lid. Okay. Little tip, keep all your lids in the same containers, so that way you can find them a lot easier rather than digging through all your stuff in your kitchen. Okay, so now we're going to transfer our shredded cabbage into this container. And we're going to be using rice vinegar 3 times around the horn. So it's probably about like a tablespoon and a half. And we're going to do a little bit of some seasonings on here. And we're going to go with a little bit of furikake. If you've never had furikake before, it's excellent. It's basically sesame seeds, kelp, and nori, and a little bit of sugar, traditionally. So we're going to go ahead and put that in there as well. Also going to give you that saltiness that you're looking for from the kelp. And then we're going to put a little bit of water, just a little bit. Okay, you have the mix, give it a shake. And you can put whatever aromatics, any different flavors, any different spices that you're looking for. The trick is to have vinegar, water, and a little bit of sugar. And we're going to start to get that doing what they refer to as a quick pickle. And it's going to be really flavorful, really bright, and it's going to add a lot of depth to our meal. See, cooking's not so bad. It's not that scary. So while that's getting finished to prepare, right now I have 12 minutes. I can make an entire other meal for breakfast because I have the stove on, the stove open, I have the oven on, so I can make anything that would require the same temperature. And I'm going to start getting the kitchen cleaned up and getting ready for packing these things into lunches. Okay, so one thing to talk about while we're waiting for that to finish up is the type of storage that you want to use for meals. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of plastic. I know it's very versatile, but I feel a little bit weird about heating them up in a microwave and things like that. So I like to use glass. So these are made by Pyrex. I got these at Target for about $4 each. For me, they're extremely versatile because these can go into the oven directly. They can go into an air fryer, or into a microwave. And so you can use them for a lot of different purposes. Really easy for reheating, and they're really good for storage for food. And they're really good for portion sizes as well. So I got these little guys. I can drop a link if people are interested about where I got these and where you can find them. And they have these little lids. And so you figure out whatever works for you, for your system. They're also dishwasher safe, all that good stuff. So whatever you want to do, whatever works for you, that's the answer. The answer is what you want to do is what you're going to use. And if you're not going to use it, then it's not going to work for you. And it doesn't matter whatever I say, because it's not something that fits within your parameters. Another thing that I really like are these guys, which are these little waxed paper that take the same use as a single-use of a plastic bag for things like this. So that way I can wrap them, and these will keep this fresh and new, and they're completely reusable, and you can wash them. Easy way to add more vegetables to your diet is frozen vegetables. So that way you don't have to worry about vegetables going bad in your fridge, because Lord knows, oh my God, I just have moldy stuff growing in it all the time because I'll buy something with the best of intentions of cooking it, don't get around to it for a week, and then there goes $5, right? Or $10 or whatever you're spending on. I like organic vegetables too, so it's a lot more expensive. This is the second best to fresh because it's flash frozen, which means it's still holding the same amount of nutrients predominantly that fresh vegetables are. So we're going to use green beans. I'm going to go ahead and empty this out into my pan. And I'm going to go ahead and show you another trick as well, because people like, how do I steam vegetables? How do I add a lot of flavor to them? I don't know how to do that without adding too much sodium or too much. It's always just too much. So I'll show you a quick tip. If you're not familiar with bouillon cubes, this is going to be your best friend. So rather than opening up an entire container of broth that you're only going to need about a cup of anyway, these little flavor packets are a lifesaver because it adds all. It's basically, if everyone's ever had top ramen, that's pretty much what's in that packet, except it's made with a bunch of other preservatives and things that are not so great. But this particular company, this brand is really good. And I'm going to go ahead and put this whole cube in there and waiting for that to heat up, because the frozen nature of the green beans are going to act as the predominant amount of water, but I'm going to probably add about 1/4 cup to maybe anywhere from 1/4 cup to a full cup, depending on how wet you want. All right, releasing the pressure on our Instant Pot. We've been letting that go for about 19 minutes because we've had extra time that we've been working on cooking everything else. So I've added some water to our green beans. I broke up that bouillon cube in there. I'm just going to bring that to a boil. All right, we're going to pull out chicken. Oh yeah. Another thing that every kitchen should have is a thermometer, which for poultry, you're wanting it to be 165. And remember, we're cooking this to be reheated later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out these little ones that are already cooked, chop that guy up, and put him back in there for a minute, and that's going to get him all the way there. All right, let's take a look at our rice. Ooh, yeah. So normally that would take over an hour to make that rice. Rice paddle. All right, so that rice is beautiful. It is perfect. So it's not too soggy, definitely not dry. That's exactly what we were looking for. A quick tip that you can do with rice also, if you're trying to cut down on the amount of carbs that you're doing, brown rice is obviously better than white rice because of the fiber. It also helps the glycemic reaction for people who have blood sugar issues. But a quick thing that you can do with rice is you can also cut it in half with a bean, like a lentil, or you can also use riced cauliflower or riced broccoli. And that's going to add more vegetable and cut down on the amount of carbs that you're eating as well.